Okay, I think...
Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. Thank you so much for making it to the webinar, to today's meeting, which is focusing on open science and open access principles for open access and open science principles and practices in East African community states. We are truly honored to work with the East African Science and Technology Commission, EASTECO, in this process whereby we'll be working closely with the East African community states in creating awareness on open science and practices in the region. Also co-hosting this meeting is PLOS and also UNESCO. Now, without further ado, I'd like to get into the program itself and give just a further introduction of why we are doing this. To begin with, my name is Joy Owango. I'm the Executive Director of the Training Center in Communication. We are a research capacity trust based at the University of Nairobi, Kenya. Our objective is to train, support, and empower researchers, research institutes, and governments in improving their research output and increasing their visibility through scholarly and science communication. Open science is one of the activities that we are heavily involved in, especially when it comes to the adoption of this practice in the region. So now, considering the benefits of open science and open access principles and practices, the East African Science and Technology Commission, EASTECO, in collaboration with the East African partner states, have proposed to ingrain open science and open access principles and practices in regional science and technology activities to ensure that the community reaps the benefits for accelerated regional integration and social economic development. EASTECO therefore has collaborated with TCC Africa, PLOS, in order to promote the application of open science and open access principles and practices in the East African states. For us, this is extremely important because we are looking at the adoption of open science at a regional level, and that means working with policymakers and bringing all the major stakeholders involved so that they can understand what we are getting into, what they are getting into, and the benefits that open science is going to have for their respective academic communities and also countries. So the goal of not only this meeting, but also the partnership we are doing with the East African Science and Technology Commission is to enhance acceptance and adoption of open science and open access principles and practices for increased socioeconomic development and regional integration of the East African partner states, with the objective of widening and deepening the application of open science and open access principles and practices in the EAC region science and technology innovation system for enhanced production, dissemination, adoption, and the use of scientific data and information. Without further ado, I would like to introduce the Executive Secretary of the East African Science and Technology Commission, Dr. Sylvance Okoth, who will open up the webinar and take us through the mandates that EASTECO has when it comes to promoting open science practices and principles in the region. Over to you, Sylvance.
Thank you, Joy, for that elaborate introduction. Honorable heads of policy and regulatory commissions and councils for science and technology in East Africa, partner states here invited, including the commissions and council for university or higher education in partner states, the national councils and commissions for science, technology, and innovation in partner states of the EAC, heads of national libraries and knowledge management centers and institutions in partner states, distinguished scientists who are here with us, policymakers, specialists in various areas, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to take this opportunity to welcome you to this important occasion where we are going to deliberate on issues of open science and open access. My name is Sylvan Sokot. I'm the Executive Secretary for East African Science and Technology Commission. Joy has just given you an elaborate background of the liaison, or rather the partnership we've come up with together to promote open science and open access principles and practices in East African community partner states and even beyond. And I would not like to reiterate. I would like to tell you a little more about EASTECO and how its mandate links well with promotion of open science and open access practices in the region. And as a platform, which is a regional intergovernmental body that coordinates activities of science and technology in the region and also in partner states, we feel better placed to help in the promotion or collaborative promotion of principles and practices of open science and open access in the partner states. So I would just like to project a short, just a minute, a short presentation of just four slides so that you'll be able to follow up well. I've already told you who we are. I would like to tell you now what we do as EASTECO. I've already said that we are an institution of East African community. We have our secretariat in Kigali, Rwanda. And our mandate is to promote and coordinate the development, management, and application of science and technology in East African partner states. We have a lot of objectives, but I've singled out two here that are relevant to why we are here today. One of our objectives is to formulate regional science, technology, and innovation policies, strategies, and regulations, including frameworks that promote exchange and utilization of scientific information, right from conception, generation, and even dissemination. And towards this end, we are actively involved in publications, exemplified here by a journal that is regional in nature, where we have ingrained open science and open access principles and practices. We also have a number of other platforms for sharing or disseminating research information, research data, and these include conferences, and we have a number of them in the region that I think this initiative will benefit from. As you've been told by Joy, we have come up in partnership with the Public Library of Sciences and the Training Center in Communication to promote open access and open science principles and practices in the region. And as I've said, we have already ingrained some of these practices in initiatives, one of them being a journal that is being run in the region. But we also noted that we need to ingrain this in the STI policy, the regional STI policy. We are in the process of developing the regional STI policy. And we realized that for us to ensure that stakeholder participation is included in proposing the inclusion of open science and open access principles in the policy, we need to begin with stakeholders meetings, like the one we have just convened now. I would like to inform us that it is not new. The practices of open science and open access principles and are not new in the region, but they have not been structured in a regional way that is captured in the policy and strategies. And we thought that different countries in the partner states are at different levels of adoption or other use of these principles. So we came together to, first of all, liaise with the heads of institutions of policy and regulatory institutions in partner states to first introduce ourselves to this initiative, and then we'll move out and devolve it to institutions that generate science and technology information and data, and then promote it in learning institutions and also in knowledge management institutions, like in libraries and other repositories. I have just highlighted that if you look at historical to current delineation of either closed or open access publications in the region, you would see what I have presented there, just to show us that different countries are at different levels, but there is some form of open science or open access practices going on in partner states. What we need is to promote it and also to streamline it and mainstream it in our policies and regulations so that it becomes a coordinated process. I take cognizance of the presence of research councils in our midst, the representation of research councils and commissions and council for institutions of higher learning, especially universities, ministries and directorates of research, especially in science and technology, and national libraries. We look forward to a constructive and effective deliberation on the open science and open access principles and practices, looking forward to where do we go from here. Is it something that we think is of benefit to the region? Will it promote science and technology in a way that would not be so if excluded? So with those few remarks, I would like to wish us well in our deliberations. I'll step out a bit and rejoin you later. I'm in another meeting. Feel welcome and thank you very much for your participation. Back to you, coordinator.
Thank you so much, Sylvans. And it's a nice opening to what we are going to be discussing. As Dr. Okoth has mentioned, we are looking at how we can also include the aspects of open science in the existing regional open science policy, because we are in a very good space as partner states to build up on what already exists. Bearing in mind the primary beneficiary, knowing very well that this is going to be multi-sectoral, the primary beneficiary of the open science policy is definitely the research institutes and the universities. As I said, that is primary because they're secondary beneficiaries of the benefits of open science, and that is actually multi-sectoral. But when you're looking at the primary beneficiaries will be our research institutes and universities, it makes sense that the fact that we are working on a regional STI policy, it does make sense to also include aspects of open science within it so that we can have a foundation that we can use even when we are expanding it within our respective countries. As Dr. Okoth said, that this is a buy-in meeting because this is the first regional meeting, and we will begin national meetings with the respective stakeholders. That is the university commissions and the research councils and the university library associations. And hot on the heels of this, the first one is actually going to be held in Tanzania in November, where the conversations have begun with the council, the Tanzania Council of Science and Technology, COSTECH, and also where we're also going to, which will also include the Library Consortia and the Tanzania University Commission. It is important to bring in all these stakeholders to have the same conversation when it comes to the adoption of open science and also the implementation of open science principles within their respective countries, particularly if we are also going to also include it within the regional policy. So bearing in mind that open science is a global initiative, we have invited a representative from UNESCO. So we have Dr. Anne Pasek, who is going to take us through the UNESCO recommendation on open science. It's no longer a regional or a national issue. This is a global initiative. And it's also good to know what is happening globally. what can we learn from other countries? What does the UNESCO recommendation on open science mean for us? What can we pick out of it so that we can contextualize it at a regional level or even at a national level? So over to you, Dr. Pasek.
Thank you very much, Joy, and many thanks for organizing this this webinar. It's really encouraging to see sub-regionally, whether it's in Africa or in other regions, this willingness to look into open science principles, to see how they can fit into national and regional STI policies and roadmaps and plans. It is very good, and it's very timely, particularly, as you said, at the international level. 193 member states, 193 countries have just adopted an international legal and standard setting instrument on open science, which is the UNESCO recommendation on open science. So I will tell you a few words about the recommendation, and I will tell you a little bit what we are doing and how we could bring together some of the tools that we are currently developing also into your discussions and into development of policies on regional level or also on national and institutional level. So I will start by sharing my screen. I hope everybody can see it well. So just a little bit of background as why open science is something that is important on the international level and also on the continental level with regards to Africa in particular. Because we know when we have these global agendas and regional agendas for sustainable development, the Sustainable Development Goals at the international level, Agenda 2063 on the continental level. And it is absolutely clear that without science, technology, innovation, these goals cannot be achieved. But it is also very increasingly clear that we cannot use science that is closed and that is only accessible to certain people, certain communities, certain countries to be able to solve these goals. So to achieve sustainable development, we do need innovative solutions, and these innovative solutions require an efficient, transparent, vibrant scientific community that includes not only scientists, but also goes beyond scientists, and that is absolutely accessible to all. So there is definitely a need to democratize science and the entire scientific process to make it more efficient, equitable, transparent, and inclusive. And this is where actually open science comes into play. Open science, and when we talk about open science, we really think about opening the entire scientific process from formulation of hypotheses to the development of methods, data collection, analysis, publication, distribution, access to publication and other information data, and then the use of this information. So openness in the entire scientific cycle. And if we do apply the principles of open science, then there is a high potential to increase the quality of science, to make the entire scientific process and its outputs more accessible, transparent, collaborative, and inclusive. And then, of course, open science, if implemented correctly, can really be a true game changer in bridging the science, technology, and innovation gaps that exist not only between countries, but also within countries, and also to fulfill the human right to science as it is enshrined in the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights. And then finally, at the global level, the way we see open science is really as an important accelerator for the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. And open science is not something, as you heard before, that has been around for a couple of years. It really it's a movement that has been going on for several decades now, but it has been quite uneven in different parts of the world, for different disciplines, for different actors. So there was a need to try to understand at the international level, what does open science really mean? What are the different parts of open science, the different elements of open science? Who are the actors? What are the shared values? What are the shared principles? And what are the actions that are kind of needed at the international level and then contextualized also on national and regional levels? So that is the reason why the UNESCO member states tasked the organization, UNESCO, which is the United Nations agency dealing with education, science, culture, and communication, to develop this international standard setting framework on open science, which is a UNESCO recommendation on open science. We've been tasked to do that in 2019, and in 2021, after a 2-year process of consultations with different regions, with different stakeholders, with different member states who actually negotiated the text of the recommendation as well, this recommendation has been adopted in November last year at the UNESCO General Conference by 193 member states. So it really was widely accepted and unanimously adopted, because countries, particularly after the lessons learned from COVID-19, realized the potential and the strength of science that is more accessible, that is more transparent, and that is more kind of connected to societal needs as well. So these UNESCO recommendations are legal instruments in which the General Conference, which is the governing body of UNESCO, formulates principles and norms to regulate at the international level a particular question. In this case, it is of course open science. And then the member states are invited to take their own legislative or other steps to actually implement those recommendations within their own national frameworks. So even though it's soft law, it's not like a convention, it really is an important instrument at the international level that countries are supposed to implement on national level and then report back on the progress made to UNESCO every 4 years. So just very quickly on what the recommendation says in terms of definition of open science. So first of all, it defines open science in a very broad way, like as a set of actions and practices that make scientific knowledge openly available, accessible, and reusable for everyone, that increase scientific collaborations and sharing of information for the benefits of science and of society, and that open the processes of scientific knowledge creation, evaluation, and evaluation to, and communication also to societal actors beyond the traditional scientific community. So the idea with open science is, yes, to open it more towards scientists and scientific community, but also to open science more widely to the broader community. We've identified 4 pillars for open science. So open scientific knowledge, and here we have open access to publications, open research data, open educational resources, open source software and code, as well as open hardware. Another important pillar is open science infrastructures, both virtual and physical, shared infrastructures that support open science services and information. Then open engagement of societal actors, be it through citizen science, participatory science, scientific volunteering, crowdsourcing, crowdfunding. So any action that brings other actors from society into the scientific process. And then an open dialogue with other knowledge systems, which many countries have underlined as very important in terms of finding solutions to global, national, regional, local challenges. And that is to create this dialogue with traditional knowledge holders, with community knowledge holders, traditional knowledge holders, and with local communities. So a very broad definition that brings together different pillars, with open access being one of the elements of the entire open science process. Another important thing was the definition of values and principles that need to be taken into account when putting into place open science practices, policies, roadmaps. And in terms of values, we really look into quality and integrity of research and science, but also collective benefit, equity and fairness, diversity and inclusiveness. So science really is seen and defined in this recommendation as a global public good, and as such really do need to adhere to these values and also the different principles that need to be used to put these values into practice. So transparency, equality of opportunities, responsibility, collaboration, inclusion, flexibility, and sustainability are some of the principles of open science. And I do encourage everybody who has not yet read the recommendation, to have a look at it and to kind of see what is the global framework that the countries would like to go towards. There is also 7 areas of actions that the countries agreed to, and under each of them there are specific actions that are recommended to different countries and different actors and stakeholders in the country. And it goes from the promotion of common understanding of open science to developing an enabling policy environment. And it's interesting that we have been talking about this already in this webinar right from the start. Investment in infrastructures and services for open science, investment, of course, in human resources, training, education, digital literacy, capacity building, fostering a culture of open science by also aligning the different incentives for open science, promoting some innovative approaches for open science and engagement of actors in scientific processes, and of course, international collaboration and multi-stakeholder collaboration at all levels. Now, we are all very well aware that there are several challenges in Africa and in other countries to really put in place and implement the recommendation. And maybe some of the key challenge areas is this change in the conventional scientific culture that needs to change towards more openness, capacity building, both at human and institutional level, investment in adequate infrastructures, including in particular reliable internet connectivity, because it is at the basis of many open science practices. So looking into internet connectivity while looking at open science is absolutely critical. Then alignment of incentives, revision of criteria for evaluation of scientific excellence and scientific careers. If we really do want to promote open science, then we have to value that in scientific careers, and we have to reward that in progression of scientists. And then we also have to be aware of and address the unintended negative consequences of open science practices. One of them, of course, is the rising article processing charges, which are unsustainable and definitely to be addressed. And it is interesting to see that there are, again, different actors coming together trying to address some of these unintended negative consequences. And we see capacity building, development of policies, rearrangement of funding and incentives for science, infrastructures, and monitoring as key areas to work on to be able to address these challenges and also implement the recommendation. And at UNESCO, at the international level, we have set up 5 working groups along these 5 areas, looking into capacity building policies, financing, infrastructures, and monitoring. And they are helping us in building a toolkit that we would then be able to provide to different actors, policymakers, researchers, university vice chancellors, chancellors, innovators, publishers, and others. They can use these documents, that they can use this guidance that we are providing for them to be able to help them in the development of their different actions, activities, policies, and strategies. Now, coming to Africa, there is a lot of different things that is happening on the continent. And you will hear more about East Africa in the following presentations and more in detail what is happening. But I think it's really important to understand that it's a very interesting region, Africa, the continent, but there's a lot happening for open science. I think there is a lot of understanding of benefits of open science. There is need to explain it more to different actors. So workshops like these are very important in that sense. But there is already a whole movement for development of national open science policies, roadmaps. Nigeria, South Africa, Ivory Coast, Ghana, Botswana, Uganda, Mozambique, they have all taken steps towards the development of national open science policies. There are some institutional policies that have been put in place in Ethiopia, Mozambique, Kenya, Tanzania. There is a lot of capacity building, including through PLOS, TCC, and UNESCO, different workshops on open access and open science in different sub-regions. And there are platforms that are growing now to support open science on the continent. Of course, the African Open Science Platform is one of them, and I believe we will have a presentation on that as well later on. There are different actors on the continent looking into open science, and it is really important to coordinate them as much as possible, or to just collaborate within the different and between the different actors who are there, just to make sure that we capture everybody's knowledge. We don't use resources in a way that is not as efficient as it could be, but really also to learn from each other and make sure that that we advance with open science in the best possible way for African researchers, policymakers, and community population as a whole. So I have just added this last slide at the end, because I was hearing the presentation from Dr. Okoth on the need for integrating the principles of open science inside the regional policy for science, technology, innovation. And our working group on policies, open science policies, is just drafting these guiding principles for integration of open science into science, technology, innovation policies. And these are some of the principles that we are looking at right now. And later on, if there is time, I would be very happy to elaborate on them a little bit more. But I think the key message is really to integrate the principles of open science in existing science policies, rather than creating parallel open science policies. To be comprehensive and try to capture the different pillars and elements of open science, and then also to monitor and evaluate. So I know my time is up, so I'll just stop here. I will invite everybody to join us in Cape Town for the World Science Forum, where we will have an Open Science Day on the 7th of December, where we will take stock of the progress made, see a little bit what is happening in the continent and more broadly with open science, and also have some trainings for early career researchers, policymakers, and universities. This is all from me. You are very welcome to join the different initiatives at the global level as well, and just to be in touch with us on the implementation of the recommendation. So thank you very much for that, and I give it back to Joy.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pasek. And our next speaker is Ms. Rohina Anand. She's the Executive Director of Global Publishing and Development at PLOS. And she's going to take us through how PLOS is increasing equitable participation in open science. Over to you, Rohina.
Thank you, Joy. And I'd just like to start off by saying how delighted I am to be here today and see such an esteemed group of attendees here for this workshop and the start of our collaboration with the East African Commission for Science and Technology and the Training Centre in Communication. So my name is Rohina Anand. I am Executive Director for Global Publishing Development at PLOS, Public Library of Science. We tend to call ourselves PLOS. And in case any of you are not aware of PLOS, we're a not-for-profit, fully open science publisher. And we envision an open science future that's equitable, global, and collaborative. As such, we actively strive for openness and transparency throughout the whole research communication process. And that's because of the benefits they bring to knowledge dissemination, but also importantly to its utility and its reproducibility. And therefore we're purposefully open by design. So I'm going to talk about our mission and how we're trying to increase equitable participation in open science, and also how collaborations such as these with TCC Africa and EASTECO are part of this. So I'll start with a bit of history about PLOS and why we're engaged in this. But from our inception, we have been focused on catalysing broad-scale systemic change. So early in the 2000s, recognising that most existing journals were resistant to changing their business practices, we launched in 2003 our first fully open access journal. And that was in order to empower researchers to make their science and research immediately and publicly available online without restrictions. But so not only free to read, but also free to reuse and take that knowledge and do more with it. And our article processing charge, or article publication charge model, APC as it's currently referred to, though revolutionary at the time, did actually pave the way for a new wave of publishing options and ensured the future of open access. What we learned from all of this is that catalysing change is possible. And over the past 20 years, we've helped to prove the viability of open access, which is now mainstream. We changed the publishing landscape via the launch of one of our journals, PLOS One, establishing the first multidisciplinary publication that was inclusive of all rigorous and ethical research, not based on novelty or perceived impact. And we helped focus the conversation about peer review on rigor and transparency and demonstrated the importance of open data availability. But through all this, we also learned there have been unintended consequences. Author pays models through APCs are exclusionary and create a barrier to inclusion and knowledge sharing. And so I'll also talk about how we're trying to start to address this. So we've come a long way in the last 20 years, but the key benefits of open access remain the same. Those are that authors retain the copyright to their work, they're not handing it over to their publisher. That research is not only free to read, but also to download, to share and reuse. And we've seen that open access does facilitate wider dissemination of research, meaning it can be more visible. And there's now multiple studies showing how open access publications have both a download and citation advantage. So those barriers are removed, not just for the academic community, but also more broadly for policymakers, for students and the general public, enabling more impact for researchers' work and the ability for more discoveries to be made that build on this. So how then do we move from open access to open science and open research more broadly? And I'm using this terminology very purposefully, starting with open access and now talking about open science and open research. And also just to say, while I'm talking about open science, we are thinking of it as open research more broadly and thinking about science as a system of organized criticism rather than just referring to the scientific, technical or medical disciplines. And one key point that I want to make around open science and open research is that rather than being a separate or standalone part of the scientific or research enterprise, openness can and should be intrinsic to the whole research lifecycle. So that means from ideation and planning and designing research to conducting research and then generating knowledge, to validating, analysing and interpreting that knowledge, and through to dissemination and reporting and sharing it. And as Anna highlighted in the UNESCO Open Science Recommendation and Definition, we are talking about opening the processes of scientific knowledge creation, its evaluation and communication. So not just one output to everyone. So from our perspective, from the PLOS perspective, open science is about more than being able to just read an article. It's about providing the right context to understand it, the resources to replicate it, as well as the tools to collaborate and make science and research better. And it should enable equitable participation in knowledge creation and sharing. What does open science look like in evaluating and communicating research? And we find it helpful to categorize this into three areas. One is transparent processes, which might include identifiers and taxonomy, such as ORCID, which is an identifier ensuring that researchers' work is properly attributed and that they receive credit for it. Through to a credit taxonomy that ensures each author's individual contribution is noted and defined to a piece of research. Preprints, this is where authors share an early version of the work and can get early public comments on it, and they enable rapid dissemination of results, but also allow researchers and groups to establish priority for the work that they've been doing, and in addition can lead to increased attention and citation. Another transparent process, of course, is open peer review. And when we talk about open or transparent peer review, by this we mean that the peer review materials are accessible, i.e. the peer review plus the editor comments. It doesn't mean that the peer review processes, or it shouldn't mean anyway, that the peer review processes are any less rigorous or robust than they would be, or that the usual ethical checks are not applied, only that these relevant materials are accessible. So Another huge part of open science, of course, is access and sharing of multiple research outputs. This is so we can start to tell the whole research story rather than it just being represented by one article at the end of a process. So this means sharing open data, open code, open methods through to protocols, reagents, reporting checklists, all of which hopefully contribute to greater reproducibility of knowledge and ability for that knowledge to be built on. So another huge part of open science and publishing for us is countering publication bias. And when we talk about publication bias, we're talking about where papers that report positive results are more likely to be published. And so one way to counter this that we have implemented is via a registered report. And this is a publication that outlines planned research, but where there's a commitment to publish the outcomes, as long as the research is carried out in a methodologically and ethically rigorous manner. So that is irrespective of the perceived significance of the findings. And we also make sure that our journals have inclusive criteria more generally. And so when we're asking, or when we're assessing whether research is suitable to be published, we focus on the importance of the research question and the rigor of the research rather than how exciting the results is. Because if a research question is worthy of funding or resourcing, then that outcome should be worthy of sharing, whatever the results. And all of this moves us from publishing as an event that happens when an article appears to become a process that better mirrors how research is carried out and then communicated. So as well as evolving our journals to better reflect the research process, we design them with open access principles and practices at their core. For us to have a meaningful impact, we need to include the broadest range of researcher voices globally. And so our new journals create diverse communities of practice and ensure that they're at the forefront of shaping how we address the most pressing health and environmental issues facing our society. And these titles ensure that there is diversity and equity of representation at all levels: editors, editorial boards, reviewers, authors, and we actively seek out research from underrepresented communities. Open science practices also feature as part of that, and they're embedded within these journals. And we're aiming really here to streamline open science practice and make it as easy as possible for authors publishing with us. As I referenced earlier, though, we've seen unintended consequences in this transition to open access and open science. And one of the main ones being author pays models through APCs, article processing or publication charges. We know they're exclusionary and we know that they can create a barrier to inclusion in knowledge sharing. So as well as moving beyond the article, we also need to move beyond the APC because we do see that this is currently the predominant business model in open access publishing. And we at PLOS are trialing new models to address this, which take the burden off individual researchers and look to spread the cost more equitably amongst institutions. One example I can give you here is our global equity model, which doesn't work on the basis of a per article or per unit payment to access a publishing service, but also, moreover, reflects countries' financial situations by relating to the World Bank criteria. And institutions which are based in Research for Life countries, which would include all of the East African countries, can participate in both models for free. That means that authors and researchers from these institutions can publish for free in the journals included in the model, subject, of course, to the usual acceptance criteria for the journal. So when talking about open science, we see a real virtuous circle of benefits for researchers and institutions. Because by opening research to more expert perspectives and feedback earlier in the research process, open science contributes to high quality, reproducible and reliable research. By making more of the artifacts of research and peer review public, open science can demonstrate the trust and integrity of the research and of the researchers themselves. Research careers are of course built on scholarly output, but open science offers a broader range of publication outputs to form part of that, options to form part of that output, so including study designs, data, code, methods, peer review, and other research products. So researchers can share more of their science. And together, more published research outputs and more detailed and accurate records can help researchers to showcase their work, build their reputation, and raise their profile. All of which together, high caliber research, well-regarded researchers, and measurable demonstrated impact all contribute to an institutional and overall national reputation for excellence, progressiveness, and leadership. So I'll finish off here, but I just wanted to summarize and say that at PLOS, you know, we've been actively working to raise the bar for openness since we've been founded. That's what we've been founded to do. And we very intentionally moved from open access to open science to try and to continue to try to define new routes to equitable participation in line with our values and principles, but also those elaborated by Anna in the UNESCO Open Science recommendation. And that's because we know that a rigid approach to open science is not going to foster the equitable participation from all communities that we want to see. And so that's why we continue to evolve and trial new models, products, and services. But that's also why we're working with local partners on the ground, with TCC Africa and with the East African Commission for Science and Technology, so that we can hear directly from you, from regional and national stakeholders in the research communication ecosystem, so that we can understand the challenges and barriers to open science for you. Because we hope that by working alongside you and with local communities, we hope that we can co-create these paths to open science, to develop solutions that work for you and reflect the cultural context in which you work, rather than just assuming that one size fits all and that everything that applies in the global north applies elsewhere, which of course it doesn't and shouldn't. So we're really excited to continue this journey with you.
Rohina? Okay, thank you so much.
Yes.
All right, thank you so much for your presentation. Now, as we are preparing to have the next speaker, I just need to reinforce that the purpose of this meeting also is to also note that one of the things that EASTECO is looking at is including the open science policies, components of open science policies within the science and technology innovation policy, which has been accepted by all the East African Community partner states. So as I said, it is easier to ride on what already exists and then build on that and contextualize it at a regional level. Granted, open science is multi-sectoral, but the foundation of the foundation of beneficiaries of open science is ST&I and also tertiary education. So bearing in mind that there's a regional policy that has been created, building up on including open science in that regional policy is a great foundation for us as East African partner states to have as the beginning of having an open science mandate, which can be contextualized within our regional, within our respective countries. Now, part of this meeting will include a 10-minute interactive session where we need to understand what your challenges are in adopting open science, what you need to change, and what needs to be done to implement it. So it will be we will break you up in, we'll have a breakout session where we'll have this conversation so that we can understand what your challenges are, what you need to do to have open science adopted within your specific countries. And without further ado, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Nokuthula Mchunu. She is the Deputy Director at the African Open Science Platform at the National Research Foundation, South Africa. Now, Dr. Nokuthulu has been involved in the process of the open science policy, the drafting of the open science policy in South Africa, which has reached draft 2. and the second draft stage. And today she's going to take us through the creation of national open science policies, the engagement, the challenges and the opportunities that she has faced, also with the AOSP they have faced when putting this policy in place, and also what we need to learn from this. Over to you, Dr. Nokuthula Mchunu.
Thanks, Joy. Yeah, so at foremost, I had thought that I was just going to have a discussion, but at a later stage, I thought I should just share with you just a few slides because it's not a long talk. So as Joy has introduced, we are based at the National Research Foundation. The initiative is the African Open Science Platform. So it has been a foresight with the International Science Council to establish this initiative hosted at the NRF, but we are looking at it as a Pan-African initiative. So in South Africa, what has happened is that we had a lot of engagement. I'm not sure if some of you are familiar with EOS, which is the European Open Science Cloud, which has been in really at the forefront of trying to push open science before the UNESCO recommendation came into effect. So they've been at this project for almost 10 years, and I think in the last 2 years, it was adopted by the European Parliament to say open science is in their member state is a must and it must be policy. So in South Africa, we had a lot of first to try and understand what would be our needs on policy. So we had a lot of dialogue with the European and understand theirs and what would be our needs, which would be different. So if you look there, we started quite way back in 2018, started having this dialogue on open science policy. So before we had our first draft at the beginning of, towards the end of last year, we went to about 3 of these open science dialogue with the EU until we had the full draft. So our policy draft, and it was fortunate that this current parliamentary term, the government had decided to put both the Department of Science and Innovation and the Department of Higher Education as one department. Usually, or previously, these 2 departments existed separately. So I think it was fortunate talking to Open Science because it is obvious that the Department of Science and Innovation and the Department of Science and Technology take the lead in this. So they were in a bigger discussion with the ministries and the people who are heading this project, and with the Universities of South Africa being the chair of all the vice chancellors or the presidents of the universities in South Africa being hosted in one office. So the CEO of that office was the actual chair of the draft of the open science policy. So at the same time, the African Academies of Science was part of it, of the drafting of the science policy, and us as the National Research Foundation, we were part of that. So after the first draft by the selected members was completed, the members of all public were invited to have a discussion. So in the first one, we had a long discussion. There were a lot of inputs, which I will discuss a little bit later in the next slide. There's a lot of input. But after that, it was the main point that came out that it is difficult only for science and innovation and the Department of Higher Education to discuss this in separation without the Department of Trade and Industry, as it's called in South Africa, because there were a lot of IP issues that the Department of Science and Technology and Department of Higher Education could not tackle. So draft 2 had inputs then from Department of Trade, and finally after that second draft, which went as of now, it has been approved by the all the ministries, all the ministers committee for further public engagement. So South Africa is an open science policy. The South African government decided to go on a new policy route, and it's taken quite some time, but I feel that the experience that we had has taught us quite a lot, but also engagement with other partners has helped. So what we took from here, if you look at that, when you then look at policy, I know I've been talking in country policy per se, but there are certain institutional supporting policies that also need to happen. So the first question each country needs to ask themselves, and I think Anna touched a bit, and then we had a discussion also with Joy last week, that do you think as a country, is it easier or is it make sense for each country to go new policy as South Africa has done, or look for amendment? With open science policies, you must think amendments. Sometimes you can't change drastically the policy. It comes back to being a new policy. How much of existing policy you can amend to fit open science policies? You will see why I am asking that question. Then, as I've intimated before, is that the Department of Trade, because of trade economy, IP, profit sharing, ownership issues come into place. So whichever entity is responsible for this part of in each member country or state or region needs to be included when drafting or making these amendments. There are other lessons that we've learned, and we still, although it is there, it's still, we feel maybe not articulated very well, but we're hoping that the next wider public engagement, which before the policy becomes law, needs to go through. We hope that the communities or citizens will inform how the indigenous knowledge systems, culture, tradition can form clarity or be clear in the policies. Because again, in different countries, the system sits in different ministries. So each country needs to decide how they go about including this in their open science policy. Then you'll have policies that will talk to data and publication or any type of output that needs to be shared. This could be institutional. This per institution, that these policies need to exist and need to support the bigger country policy. This is the biggest issue in the policy, in the main policy in South Africa. It is there because it is mostly understood that people who participate the most in open science activities are researchers or research performing. Yes, there's some sort of citizen science in it, but because that researchers need benefit from sharing data or publication in the way it is done now, we need to rethink how we incentivize researchers to participate in open science activities. And then we need to think again, if you're going to have sharing of any type of output in science, or it could be data, publication, knowledge, we need to figure out who will be responsible for stewardship of those outputs and how it's done, how is it accessible. So these are the questions that the policy needs to answer. Some of it may be institutional, but they can be framed in the main policy. I think I will stop there for now, and then we can take the questions later.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mchunu. Now, when it comes to open science, one of the biggest issues that is raised is in regards to incentives. How does it benefit the the users or those who adopt open science and the outputs that come out of it. What does it mean for the university? What does it mean for the research institutes? And as such, we felt it was important to also highlight this. And we have Dr. Rhoda Wanyenze. She sits on the executive board of the San Francisco Declaration on Open on the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, DORA, and she's also from Makerere University in Uganda. And what she's going to take us through is the global and continental perspectives on open science and their impact on incentives in universities. Over to you, Dr. Wanyenze.
Thank you, Joy, and good afternoon to you all in your respective capacities. I do appreciate the opportunity to share my perspectives on this issue, first as a scientist and academician that's involved in research and very familiar with the issues around incentives, but also in my capacity as an executive board member for the Declaration on Research Assessment that's been working on these issues for quite some time now. And I hope to share some of the tools that have been developed by DORA very quickly that you can actually find on the website for those that are interested in seeing how to improve research assessments. So this movement towards open science is one that in a way is inevitable, but we struggle with a bit of the steps in this pathway in terms of how we move from the more widely acceptable open publication, despite the publication costs as a hindrance, to other steps of the science being more open, including sharing data and others along the spectrum. This is something that requires thinking through in terms of individual level, as well as institutional culture and practices and beliefs, the systems and infrastructure, but also thinking in a broader sense in the context, the environment outside the institutions. We've had around the national level policies that is needed to be able to support the institutions to make that shift. But there's also beyond the country to the broader context in terms of how science is viewed and assessed, including rankings for universities and other incentives out there that make us somehow stuck within where we are right now. So we need to be thinking around these issues in a bit more holistic way, but also to have structures and networks around science, around the institutions, and also to support the countries to make this move from where we are right now to truly open science. And in this, I was looking at some of the examples that now we have. For example, the European Universities Association and how they are supporting countries as well as universities within the region to move from the current status to more open science. And they are doing this through periodic assessments to see where the universities are, but also to document some of the challenges and working around supporting the countries to overcome some of these countries. In one of the surveys that was done, for example, in 2018, they found that 62% of European universities had open access policies on research publications, but only about 13% had open access policies on data. Now, we don't know where this is for Africa, but somehow I know that most of us perhaps don't even have open access policies, let alone those moving us from publications to open access data. So perhaps we need these kinds of assessments too, even for the East African region as we speak, so that we see where we are, what are the challenges, what is holding us back, and then we can have a more systematic and evidence-informed way to intervene. So these are some of the issues that perhaps we should be engaging on. And then looking at research assessment, again, in a broader sense, and the efforts that exist so that we can move from quantity to quality, and especially move towards the impact of science, which is the real essence of the research that we conduct to inform development and improvements in various disciplines where we are, whether it's the social and behavioral sciences, or whether it is biomedical sciences, wherever we are. The reason we conduct research is actually for impact, but we don't actually always look at the quality and impact of research. And we've spent most of our time looking at the quantitative metrics in terms of numbers of publications, in terms of where they are published, even when we know that where they are published perhaps might not tell us much in terms of the actual impact of the research or the researcher that we seek to measure. So these are some of the areas where we perhaps need to move both at individual, institutional, as well as the external environment. For example, looking at the South African example, where all the entities that fund research are being involved in this policy. If we could use the EU example, for example, the European University Association is providing support to develop research assessment approaches that focus on quality, on potential, and future impact of research, with an eye on open science practices. So perhaps we need to have this kind of support too at a regional level within Africa and within the East African region. And it's refreshing to hear the plans to integrate this in our regional policies and perhaps move that towards the support that the institutions need to be able to achieve this. But at the global level, I will also cite resources that exist from the San Francisco Declaration of Research Assessment, which is DORA. This is just an example of one of the surveys and what it revealed for the EU universities, with a lot of universities participating in this assessment. And I think the area I would like to draw your attention to is just how few universities that had other assessments for researchers, including mentoring, social outreach, knowledge transfer, which we speak a lot about in terms of research and innovations, and open science incentives. But the majority of them were focusing on the traditional quantitative assessments on numbers of grants, publications. And I think the picture is perhaps even more skewed for us in Africa. And this is something we need to focus on. So the issues we would like to see happen within open science perhaps should be integrated into that criteria for new hires, for promotions of faculty and researchers, so that they have inbuilt incentives to be able to share more openly. In terms of what the DORA is doing, DORA is coming to about 10 years now since it was launched, and so many individuals as well as institutions across a number of countries have subscribed to this, including funding agencies. And in fact, many of the funding agencies have now started changing, already changed for the past several years, how they assess researchers and institutions that are funded to now integrate the impact, and have moved away from the traditional numbers of publications or numbers of previous grants, which in a way has a lot of inequity issues and favoring more established researchers, especially from the global north. So this shift is actually positive for us as researchers in the South, and as it emphasizes less your previous funding record and your previous publications in terms of numbers, and focusing more on the impact of your research. In this slide, I would like to just highlight the broad spectrum of changes that need to happen in research assessments beyond individual level researchers to a whole institution, the communities, and the external environment that I talked about, which might have a lot of other players, including funders, national level, ministries, science and technology, education, in terms of how they assess the performance of institutions of higher learning and how they fund them. Because traditionally in some countries, even universities are funded based on quantitative metrics on how much publications are coming out there. So some of these need to change in a broader spectrum, and in a way it makes it complex for us to make this shift, but in a way it helps us to begin to think in terms of the broad spectrum of who should be engaged when we are trying to make these shifts, so that we can have coherence in terms of the move towards open science. And here I'll just flag that we do have several tools that DORA has developed, and they are available on the DORA website to support institutions in terms of this move. And the space rubric is one of those that has been developed in a very consultative and engaging manner, with several individuals participating across 26 countries and across 6 continents in its development, to try and take into consideration some of the contextual variations in terms of this movement. And in this, one of the areas I would like to emphasize is that we need to again look beyond the individual, the institutional conditions, the infrastructure, there's ICT, there's the policies and several other issues that we need to have in mind. And also looking at the capabilities, both at individual and institutional level, to appreciate and be able to implement the interventions, while also realizing that institutions are at very different levels in terms of the movement to open science, and we need to recalibrate even when we have broadly available tools such as those that DORA has developed. We need to evaluate the context at institutional as well as country level to see what really works for us. And certainly this also applies at regional level. What is it that works for us in Eastern Africa? What is it that will work for us in Africa, but also at institutional level? As I end, I'll just note some of the synergies that we have in terms of what DORA is doing and what the open science movement is doing. We have a lot in common in terms of emphasizing the value and impact of research, and not just focusing on quantitative metrics, but especially also the drive to be able to confront the global as well as individual inequities in the production of research and research assessments, and how they drive this, and examining and challenging the existing power structures so as to increase participation in research by the most underrepresented communities. So we do have a lot in common in terms of addressing these issues and making science more equitable, which also means that we have more equitable growth and development, as science and innovations is really critical in driving this. In conclusion, I would like to say that this move towards open science is really inevitable, and it's one that needs to happen if we are to maximize the benefits of research. And if we are looking to those that fund research to drive this, they are already moving towards this. Many funding agencies have already made these moves to require that we change the way we even articulate our CVs that are used to assess who gets funded, but also requiring us to share the data openly within a certain period of time when it's been funded. So we need to begin to look at how we are assessing research so that we can incentivize this movement at individual level, at institutional level. And we need to look at the policies, the infrastructure and systems that need to change for this to happen, as well as networking and having networks within the region that can support us so that we can move together in a coherent manner, and especially in a manner that is context specific, because we do have differences within our regions, within East Africa and within Africa. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be a part of this discussion.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wanyenze. And we are going to get into our next session, which will be the question and answer session. Some of the questions have been answered in the chat, but I would like to read two that came out clearly. And then after that, we will get into the breakout session where we'll have our discussion on some of the challenges and the opportunities that arise when it comes to open science. So Luis Sibomana has a question for Dr. Anna Pasek, and his question is your advice for a country to develop its own open science policy, or better work at a regional level as what is being done with what is being proposed with EASTECO? I mean, it is better to do it at a regional level. He's emphasizing that it is better to do it at a regional level than a national level, but he's open to discussions on how you can guide them.
Yes, great. Thank you. That's a very good question. The discussions that we had when we were developing the recommendation was that it is very important that there is coherence at the regional level, particularly for open science, particularly because the idea is to have shared infrastructure, shared financial mechanisms, shared vision for what open science means for a region or for the sub-region. However, it is also important that then those regional policies are contextualized within national context. So a national policy is also equally important because it does take those principles from the regional level, just like from international level, and puts it really in the real context of their realities. A development of a national policy, and it can be a policy, but it can also be a roadmap. It can be an action plan that kind of puts into place the implementation of a regional policy. This is also important because it allows countries to map their national open science ecosystem, the actors who are there, and to kind of bring them together while implementing open science and creating open science environment in their countries. So from UNESCO's perspective, and again, this is coming from the different consultations that we've had with countries around the world, is that there are benefits in having regional policies and also in parallel having national policies that of course are aligned, and all of these things have to align and go in the same direction. That's exactly what is happening at the EU level. There are some strategic policies at the EU level, but then every country is also developing their own national policies to be able to contextualize it in the best possible way in their own national context. So I hope that this responds to the question.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pasek. And it's also the reason why we are looking at having this open science policy coming at the regional level in building up on what EASTECO has already done with the STI policy, and then later also having it contextualized within your respective countries. And for those, all of us who are in East Africa, we are aware that most of the policies that we have within the national policies that we have in our respective countries literally originate at a regional level. So that's why we are saying instead of trying to make the whole process a bit more complicated, it's working from the regional level would be much more easier. And then we contextualize that open science policy or framework to suit our respective national interests. So, and this is even faster, as I said, because we are looking at riding on the existing STI policy, which has been accepted by all the 7 countries as we speak. So it's just an issue of improving on the existing policy, then contextualizing it in our respective countries. Now, the next question is from Solomon Derese, and this is for you, Dr. Mchunu. He'd like to know, what are some of the challenges of open science and open research, especially when it comes to IP? Dr. Mchunu? Dr. Mchunu, can you hear us? Dr. Mchunu? Okay. Dr. Mchunu, are you able to hear us? Okay. So as she's trying to get on, one of the things, Dr. Mchunu can, right. One of the things that have come out clearly in some of the conversations we've had, at least this year, when it comes to IP and open science, is to what degree do you release your information? Okay. This is why also Dr. Mchunu in her presentation was emphasizing that when we are creating these open science policies, we need to be critical of the various sectors that we want to include, especially trade, the various sectors that we wish to include in the discussion of open science, because it will have a very direct impact on them. But also when it comes to IP, always, as I said, the biggest challenge is how much we have to release and how much can we protect ourselves from the commercial benefits that will arise from the IP that comes out, that is produced. One of the classic examples was with COVID-19, when we found a situation whereby the pharma in the global north were not willing to release the patents of the COVID-19 vaccine. And that is quite understandable, because you'll find that in certain sectors, especially in the pharmaceutical sector, even IT, they are very wary on what they can release. So this is something that has to be in discussion. This is why we're saying this, as you can see, this falls under ST&I. So we have to be in discussion on to what degree you can actually allow release, to what degree would you allow for information to be released in order to, which would also in turn protect your IP issues. And of course, IP related issues are different in various research areas. If you're in the social sciences, and also if you're in the kind of information you release in the social sciences will be totally different from what you release in the life sciences or in the technology, in the STEM research. So when you're looking at all these various scenarios, you need to ask yourself to what degree you will allow yourself to release information such that you do not, as much as we are making work accessible and research accessible and patents and innovations accessible, you also need to see to what degree can you protect your IP, the IP of the innovations and the research that is being produced by your respective countries. Ms. Anand, you wanted to add something?
I wasn't going to add anything, Joy.
Okay. Dr. Plastic, you wanted to add something?
No, I completely agree with you, but it is also important to know that open science does not mean unregulated science. There are licenses that you will use even if it's in the public domain. There are all kinds of different rules of engagement and rules of use that you can impose on your data or your information, etc. So open does not mean that is free out there for all to use in whatever means they want. So that's something to really think about. There are various degrees of protection or openness. So there are already IP and other tools that can be used to regulate the use of your data, and others which are in open science, but not necessarily completely there without any rules for use and for use in the public domain. So that's just something to really think about. And of course, there are data that for a variety of reasons should not be released. And we also talk about that in the recommendation quite clearly. It is up to different entities to decide which data are safe to be released, which are not, for, again, a variety of reasons, be it security, be it IP protections or other issues, safety, confidentiality, etc. And then even that data can be shared within a space that will have specific regulations about sharing those particular data. So there is a lot. There are ways of playing with and balancing, as somebody else has put in the chat, the protection versus openness of open science data and information.
I think you covered it really nicely, Anna. I mean, just to extend from there, Creative Commons licenses, which are the ones which are most commonly used for open material, are not about giving all rights away. Actually, it's about the originators of content retaining rights, but actually just enabling and facilitating more reuse and sharing and download for others to be able to take, use, see that data, not that not that they're giving away everything to do with it. And that's why these licenses are intrinsic to actually true open material rather than it just being free to access.
Thank you. Dr. Mchunu? Your hand is up. Yes.
Yes, Joy. I think just to touch on, and I know sometimes I think it does get sometimes banded about, but I think it's really, we need to think about the saying in open science, it's open as much, but it must be closed as necessary, because there are certain things that, for example, in South Africa, in our open science development, we have what we call POPI Act, which is personal information. In South Africa, you can't even put somebody's picture on a presentation without asking them. It's just law. So all those things need to speak to each other. That's why you need to get all people in the room and see how it will speak to each other so that it is implemented properly. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Wanyenze?
Thank you. I just wanted to add a few broad areas for us to think through. And I think some of these have been expounded by colleagues here earlier about being open, but with controls, with responsibility, and we need to keep equity at the center of this. We need to be more prepared to benefit from the more openly available data and other opportunities that this brings for us as a region. It's something that we need to think through in terms of our own capacity, even just for basic analytics. When we have a lot more data openly available out there, can we fully maximize the opportunities and the potential within the region? That could just be capacity for analytics, for example, but there are so many other capacities that we need to have in mind as we develop these policies. And then going beyond protecting the researchers and institutions as well as national interests, to also protect our communities, including research participants. So that goes for the ethical issues as well as we think through this shift to open science. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, there is a question that would be of interest to you, Dr. Pasek, and this is, how do we make open science cater for people living with disability to promote equity?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Very nice. I think these are some of the issues that it would be fantastic to get certain communities involved more broadly into really raising awareness about some of these issues, particularly when it comes to people with disabilities, but also some other communities that are more vulnerable or more marginalized. I think the essence of open science really is that it should be science that reaches everybody. So it would be very, very interesting to maybe have a conversation with people with disabilities to see exactly what would be the specific needs that would need to be addressed in open science practices that would indeed promote the inclusion and the benefits of people living with disabilities from more open science. And I think on our side, we would be very happy to think about some of these discussions and provide a platform for discussing it further. So if anybody is interested in talking about it more or sharing their experiences or best practices, I think it would be very, very interesting to get a little bit more in depth on some of these issues as well. So thanks for that.
Okay, there is a counter question to you, Dr. Mchunu, and this is from Kimaro Novat. And what Kimaro is saying is, if open science has some limitations or control or regulation, then this can no longer be called open science. Rather, it should be called closed science. He's looking at it from a hardline perspective. Share with us your views.
Not really. I think, again, I'm fortunate that I come from the general science of life sciences, where practice of open science has been long-standing for quite some time, and maybe not so other sciences. So if you look at how genomics and COVID has evolved so quickly, and it's because some of these open principles have existed in this type of research. So sharing of data, it could have been saying that I'm not sure if the audience is familiar. We call it the NCBI. It's where all genes in research are hosted. So whenever you do any genetic work, you have to deposit all the sequences openly, and they're available to everybody at all times for free. So all genetic work and some of the development in genetics and vaccine has stemmed from this. So it could have been, it didn't evolve this way, that I do my work in genetics and I find a sequence and I say I find a sequence and publish, but the sequence stays with me. So nobody would have had access to that. So you can't call it closed science, because then once that principle, it is embedded in all the science, that in order for you to do research, which I think in the US has become policy, where any public funded research has to be made publicly with no embargo. Right now, you can put a 12-month embargo with no embargo. So everybody has access to that at an instant. It's very different on how we operate now, that it is the researcher's choice if they want to make whatever data they have available or not. I don't know if I've answered the question.
Thank you, Dr. Mchunu. So what is becoming very clear is that it's the whole process on whatever information we are sharing is on the onus of the researcher. So that is also empowering you. So you need to know that, yes, the research, the processes need to be accessible, they need to be available, but it's still on you to choose how much or to what degree you can release that information. That is part one, as a researcher. Then the other bit that Dr. Pasik has actually emphasized on is that there are regulations. There are regulations on to what degree you can release your information, depending on the kind of innovations and processes that you want to share. So it's not that this is not the wild west. There are processes that have been set in place, there are regulations that have been set in place to empower you as a researcher, so that even when you're releasing information, you're still protected. Because the primary goal of what open science entails is to make information accessible, whether it is a limited amount or 100% accessible. We are looking at making research and processes accessible. Now we are getting into our last session, and this is an interactive session. We have 3 questions that we want you to answer. We are going to break you up we are going to put you into breakout sessions. And if you go to the link that we have put in the chat, you will see the questions that have been put in the program. And what we want to learn from you, what we want to understand and learn from you are 3 things. What are the impediments to adopting open science mandates and policies? So look at the region and ask yourself, what has stopped us from adopting open science and open science policies and mandates? Bearing in mind right now, EASTECO is saying, yes, we want to include open science within the ST&I policy. Okay, so they have made the step to do that. So what has been stopping us to reach this level? Number 2, what needs to change to allow the adoption and implementation of these policies? As I said, the questions are in the link I've shared with you. And then the last thing is, what are the next steps for you, and what timelines are necessary for these to take place. Please note, we are looking at the context of right now, EASTECO saying that they want to put open science within the ST&I policy. So if with that, with them already making that step, what do you think would be the timelines for us to actualize having open science policies and mandates within the STI policy? Remember that STI policy is it's benefiting not only the tertiary sector, but also the ST&I sector within Eastern and Central Africa. And as all our panelists have said, this can also be in turn nationalized and contextualized to our respective country. But having one at an East African level will be the umbrella version which we can use and implement within our existing countries. So we are going to put you in groups. And we look forward to hearing your views. So I'll give you about 15 minutes to discuss those questions, and we'll be moving from group to group, and we'll record each session so that we are able to understand what this, to hear your views. After the end of the session, please appoint one person. Please appoint one person who is going to share your views based on what you've discussed. So here we go. I'm putting you in the groups right now. All right.
Okay, good. So
Perspectives on that?
I'm thinking of my thinking on these the
Welcome back to the session. We are about to wrap up. So as we are preparing to wrap up, as I'd said earlier, we had broken you up into the groups so that we can have a better understanding on what the current state of open science is in your respective regions, what the challenges are, what is slowing you down in adopting open science, what you need to do, and the realistic timelines that you feel need to be worked on in the implementation of open science policies in the region. And as we have as we've had this conversation, the EASTECO is ready to put open science within the include open science within the ST&I policy, which has been ratified really by all 7 East African countries. So including it makes it easier for us to actually nationalize it within our existing countries, and bearing in mind the foundational recipients of open science. And I keep on saying this, the foundational recipients of open science are academics and researchers, and also secondary being the greater community within our respective countries. With that said and done, could we have group 1 taking us through what they came up with from their discussions?
Hi, Joy. I think group 1 was our group, and we will have Dr. Buzinge Felix Mbabazi, who will report back from our discussions.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm Dr. Buzinge Felix Mbabazi, Dean Faculty of Computing, Library and Information Science at Kabale University. Our group discussed what are the impediments of adopting open science mandatory policies. And the first one we saw, there was some socio-cultural impediments, which is brought about by lack of awareness on the benefits or importance of opening up their research. And we looked at the political, whereby there is no clear political commitment to promote open science and integration into government agenda. And we said there is need of the government to come out clearly. For example, having the country research agenda, which clearly stipulates the open science. Economical, we saw that what is still bring a problem, adopting open science is people looking at what they benefit from the opening up their research, the economic benefit. And then legal, which is there is need for a framework must be developed at the international level, at the national, with the rules for disclosure of data and other inputs and outputs of research. So there's need of those clear policies in terms of the opening up their data. What needed to be changed to allow it is actually to address those ones. For example, creating awareness at the institutional level, national, international level, coming up with a framework to clearly indicate what can be disclosed and what cannot be disclosed. And that one can also be at a national, institutional, the national level. Having fundable projects which can clearly indicate that the research outputs from that project should be published in open science access. And then having regional, national, institutional, faculty research agendas or policies on open access. And what are the next steps for you or for us? And what timelines? We realize that timelines may not be easily put, but there are some which are individual, institutional, national, and regional. For example, coming up with regional EASTECO and the IUCA can come up with those policies which they can meet the vice chancellors, later meet the institutionals come up with the meet faculties, and then to reach down. But there is the individuals whereby we need the continuous sensitization through conferences, dialogues, and workshops. But the issue of the timeline it may not be easily put. That was our discussion.
All right, thank you so much. Now, I have a question for you. Do you feel that there is political goodwill with EASTECO making it clear that they want to include open science policies within the STI policy? Because that is the goodwill that is beginning at the region, which is normally replicated at, and which is then later replicated at a national level. Do you feel like right now, after this meeting, that there's already goodwill coming from the region, from the policymakers?
Yes, yeah, there is already goodwill, and that one can be replicated to the IUCA, for example, and then once they meet the vice chancellors, and can come up to the down. Okay. So that one is okay.
Okay, and also to be clear, the IUCA is also supporting this process. So we manage what we've done in this policy engagement is that we brought in the Regional University Commission and also the Regional Science and Technology Commission so that they speak on one voice when it comes to the implementation of the open science, and the STI policy is actually going to benefit all of them. So as we speak, everybody, just know in East Africa, we have goodwill from at a regional level, whereby the open science policy is going to be included within the STI policy. The question is, what are we going to put in there and how are we going to contextualize it within our within our countries, our respective national countries? And most importantly, as what Dr. Pasek said, they could be mandates, they could be frameworks, but bottom line is we already have goodwill from the regional bodies, which also have the East African Parliament. Group 2, please. Group 2.
I'm not sure if that was us. I think it might have been.
That was, yeah, and Dr. Pasek mixed them, so it was a bit too late, but it's okay. Yes. Yeah.
I can report back. Yes. I mean, similar themes to what's been reported already, and we didn't go precisely through the 3 questions. But in terms of concerns and challenges, a lot of concerns around cost and APCs not being an ideal business model for access to OA venues, so focused on publishing, and concerns about what are reputable publishing venues as well, reputable open publishing venues because of predatory journals and how to address that. But overall, you know, the solutions were a focus on capacity building at the research level, the institutional level, the national level, all levels really, to focus on the benefits of open access and open science, but also to explicitly cover some of these concerns, whether that be around IP and how open or available material is, who it can be used by, what for, what does this mean in terms of economic versus commercial benefit, but and also around predatory journals and yeah, how to find a reputable venue.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pasek. I mean, Ms. Anand, and it's very clear, as much as we're talking at a national level and at a regional level, it's also good to recognize some of the challenges that are intrinsic when it comes to open science, and that is normally when it comes to journal selection strategy and the predatory publishing that is unfortunately associated with it. The question is, how do you manage that? How do you mitigate it? Now, group 3, please take us through your views from the group section.
This is Solomon Joy, and so I know we did not have a lot of time, but
no
we have attempted.
No problem.
And on the first one, the impediment or the challenges to adopting open science policies, one of them we identified is the willingness of stakeholders or government policy makers in supporting open science. There must come in support institutions and researchers who promote open science, and this is related to the fact that there is no reward system that's available for scientists sharing the data openly in terms of monetary incentives and also protecting or citation that the person who came up with this data, we use the data generated by so-and-so in terms of referencing and citation. And the other challenge, of course, is lack of awareness of open science by researchers. So there is need for us to have training and workshops on creating awareness what open science is all about and what makes open science different from the traditional way of doing research, which we are all familiar with. So some of the changes that need to be implemented to adopt is one is developing reward system, developing strong policies on protection of data, and most importantly, also some kind of punitive measures for abuse of data so that people can, with confidence, share their data openly. And in terms of the steps, the immediate steps in adopting this, one of these is first thing first, we need to sensitize researchers on open science and open access. So we need to conduct training workshops, etc., creating awareness, and also develop incentive policies. And also some, I don't know, articles or rules on how people who abuse the system can be tasked to answer in case they violate the open, I mean, in case they take somebody's data without giving credit to the people who originated the data. So this is what we had briefly.
Okay, thank you so much. So as I said, one of the exciting things that is coming out very clearly from this meeting is the commitment and the goodwill that has been made by EASTECO, and the fact that they are ready to include, they want to include, it's not even an issue of being ready, they want to include open science within the existing STI policy, which has already been ratified by the 7 countries in East Africa. Now, I'm glad you've mentioned the aspects that they need to also highlight and emphasize on. Number one, having a reward, having information about the reward systems, and also the protection of data, and coming up with punitive measures for abuse of data. So these are things that will definitely be included when the aspects of open science, the open science frameworks or the mandates that are going to be included within the ST&I policy. Thank you so much for that feedback. That was very helpful. The last group, please.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. My name is Sarah Nachuha. I work at Kabale University in the Department of Biological Sciences. I hope everybody can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, in the last group, sometimes it's good to speak last because you speak less. So in our group, members were cognizant of the fact that the open science, open access, and open data is going to kind of reduce the cost of having to subscribe for a journal to access information. However, they noted some challenges in this open access policies. We realized that much of what we do in East Africa is kind of in the informal sector. Some people have innovations, but they're in the informal sector. They haven't yet hooked onto the formal sector. So it's hard to kind of document them and process them for patenting. So that is a limitation for us. And then the other one is that there is limited funding for ICT infrastructure to enable the sharing this information. So some governments, there was a case in point in Mozambique. They have little budget for infrastructure. The other limitation was the lack of incentives. This has been already mentioned by the former speakers. The incentives for people who are doing the innovations, who are providing the data, it's kind of limited. And then there is also lack of a clear policy or information on the loyalties. How would you benefit from the practice and the provision of this information? What is good? What is in it for me? That kind of syndrome, you know, it's there, but you know, what is in it for me? So how do I really get incentivized to be able to keep providing information on these platforms? Then what should we do in terms of overcoming these challenges? We need to have a clear guideline on how this sharing, the benefit sharing model should be clear. What is it that should go to the innovator or the provider of information? Then increase in funding. The governments have to be tasked to increase funding for institutions and also for sectors that are in the area of generating information and generating data. They have to really provide funding for these activities to take place. Capacity building came in through also as a very strong intervention. You need to build capacity for people to be able to do these things in the education sector, okay? So research and innovation requires capacities to be built. So this is very important for us to be able to share data easily. So we need to really have the required capacities. So in the way of time frames, I think the time we're caught up by time. We didn't have much to say on this, but the timelines can be set by the relevant organizations to ensure that we get this policy or these guidelines improved in time so that we are able to implement them and hook onto the international networks. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your contribution. And I'm really grateful for what all of you have shared with us and your views. This will be put in the documents that will be prepared when including the aspect of open science within the STI policy. This has been a very helpful conversation. And as we are wrapping up, I'd like to introduce Professor George Gitau. He's the editor-in-chief of the East African STI Journal. He will be wrapping up on behalf of Dr. Sylvans Okoth, and we'll now look at what are the next steps. Dr. Gitau, Professor Gitau, are you ready? Professor Gitau? Looks like he dropped off. So in that case, I'll just wrap up and say one thing. Number one, we've already got commitment from the East African Commission of Science and Technology. So we have the goodwill from policymakers. We have the goodwill from 7 countries. Okay, so what is going to happen as a next step is that the open science is going to be included within the STI policy. We are going to factor all the contributions you've made and further engage you to make sure that we have all the right messaging and information that will be relevant to you at a regional level. Then we will start working with you at a national level to make sure that the frameworks or mandates or policies that you're going to create at a national level are relevant to you. As I say, the first country we started having these conversations with is Tanzania. And with Tanzania, we've brought in together the Tanzania Commission of Science and Technology, COSTECH, and also the Library Association, Consortia of Tanzanian University Libraries, COTUL, and also we brought in the Tanzanian Commission of Universities. So when we are having this conversation, whatever information input that you're going to share with us, we will be on hand to support you at a national level and at a regional level. So go back home knowing that we have goodwill from the East African Parliament. We have goodwill from all 7 countries. And what we are going to do is ride on putting the open science policy within, open science mandate within the STI policy, and will factor all the components that you're making. And this will be a first for East Africa. It will mean that 7 countries have committed to having open science mandates through the regional parliament. Thank you so much, everybody, and do have a lovely day. And for our speakers and our contributors, we truly thank you for making time, for having joined us. Do have a lovely day, everyone, and goodbye for now.
Thank you, everyone.